Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Due to my travel schedule, Howard and I recorded this podcast late on Wednesday, before Joel Embiid suffered a facial contusion and before we had any idea of the severity of that injury. We talk about Embiid's candidacy for various awards in the middle of the show. So just to be clear, why we don't mention the injury in there is that it had not happened yet by the time we recorded this. Thanks again for listening.
And now, the Lowe Post.
Welcome to the Lowe Post podcast, where it is time to say the three most anticipated words in the history of niche basketball podcasting. And they are, what up, Beck?
What up, Zach?
Howard Beck from Bleacher Report, the Full 48, Sirius XM Radio, his living room, wherever else you can find him, in studio. How you doing?
I'm good. Off in the living room, in fact, in my sweatpants or something, just doing whatever's required on that particular day.
Rarely have I sympathized with a television character more than I did when George Costanza tried to argue that sweatpants should be socially acceptable. Not only that, I actually sympathize with George an alarming amount of times. The episode, there was a period in my life when I was immature. I was like 23, but not ready for the trappings of proper adulthood. And I was dating a 20-year-old who was way more ready for the trappings of proper adulthood than I was. And I remember going to parties and we would have to get the wine and the cake. And I would say, why, if I was the guy to bring Pepsi and ding dongs to the party, everybody would love me. Why do I have to go out? Because I spent $100 to attend this party. But George was wrong. You have to obey civil society.
But here's the thing, though. At 23, first of all, I don't know that I experienced any trappings of adult society.
Dude, what, just wine. And back then I probably bought Yellowtail because it was $4 and that's all I had.
I'm easy. If the label looks cool, I'm buying it. I mean, we've been buying this one bottle at our little local wine shop in Park Slope that has a typewriter on the label. Like that, I'm sold. I don't care what the wine even tastes like. It's red wine. I'm
no, you give
red.
it one shot based on the label.
Well, that's
you
true.
don't give it multiple shots.
All right. It's obviously been good enough that we have bought it multiple times, but the typewriter on the label is getting me every time.
Say the brand because you might get free wine.
I honestly can't remember what the label or what the name of the wine is. It's got a typewriter on the label.
Howard, I don't want to waste your time with wine talk that I brought up.
Wine's important.
Okay.
Wine's important.
Every time you drop a big piece, we like to drag you into the studio and go a little bit behind the scenes on the big piece. And you dropped a mega piece on Jason Kidd in exile, which is interesting because I had thought I was tired of Jason Kidd. Just the feverish pitch of the debate of everything about him, from his personality to his offenses that he's committed in the past, to his coaching, to his defensive scheme, which is the most scrutinized defensive scheme in modern NBA history. And I actually, so when you sent me this, I was like, oh, that's not really what I was expecting. But the idea that this guy has, you have a knack for zooming out and finding a very interesting way to approach somebody. And the zoom out here was, this guy's literally not been out of basketball for a second in, I don't even know how many years. Essentially his life. And now he's just chilling in Phoenix. Let's go visit him and see what he's up to. How did you decide there was room to talk about Jason Kidd? How did you decide there was still room and you wanted to dive in?
Well, when he was fired by the Bucks a couple months ago, like a lot of people, I reached out through channels just to say, listen, if at some point he wants to sit down, my initial thought actually was the podcast. I thought, let's just have a conversation. I just thought it'd be interesting. And I didn't really know Kidd that well. We've intersected here and there. I covered the last couple of months of his season with the Knicks, but I did not.
Before your escape from the Knicks beat.
Before my final merciful escape from the Knicks beat. And that was after I'd been pulled back onto the Knicks beat because I started that year on the Nets beat. So we didn't have a ton of FaceTime over the years. When he was with the Nets, I was covering the Knicks, or I was still back in L.A. before that. So we didn't have a lot of one-on-one experience. And I always found him a little bit distant, to be honest. He's a hard guy to kind of penetrate. He's got that, I think I described it as this steely facade, basically. But I'd reached out through channels saying, listen, I know Jason and I don't know each other well. If he wants to talk about this at some point, I'm interested. I find him fascinating. And it was kind of a no. Everybody's laying low for a while. And then I reconnected with some folks a couple weeks ago, and they were like, "He's ready, and he'll talk to you." I can't tell you why as opposed to somebody else. There are a lot of people in the media he knows better than me. But I think maybe the distance in that case helped, that we didn't exactly have an established relationship, and I would go in fairly fresh, which I try to do anyway. But actually, a story like this, because he is a complicated individual, I actually think it was to my benefit, and maybe his, that I went into this with not a ton of preconceived notions. I do have some impressions of him that I held before I went out and hung out with him for a few hours. But yeah, no, I was just curious, Zach, because here's a guy who did this rare, very rare thing of jumping straight out of his jersey and into the coaching role, where he didn't give himself any time to decompress from the game, didn't give himself any time to distance himself.
And he literally didn't get off the court if that's what it took to try and win. He would step on the court and with a bottle or a can of a cup of water or Coke in his hand say, "Hit me." Who was the player again? He's out of the league, whoever it is.
It was.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
I'm
it was.
sorry.
It was one of the. I think it was one of their role guys.
Boy, that was just.
And a bench
that's
guys.
underrated. How ridiculous that is.
Underrated how ridiculous it was, but also I admire that was clever and kind of in the moment.
I don't even admire it. It's almost like a toddler who thinks they're being clever by looking at you as they do as they touch the thing they're not supposed to touch. Like, no, you're not being clever. You're just doing this blatant thing that you know you're not supposed to do. It's not clever. We all see it. It's not. You're not going to trick anybody like that. No one fell for that.
I think in the moment
nobody fell for it. As soon as you replayed it and read his lips.
Right. No, on YouTube it's actually labeled "hit me." I just pulled it up. But the beauty of it is that in the moment it worked. It was after the fact that he got fined for it because, it was so, obvious he was manipulating things. I don't know. I'm amused by it. This is the same guy who which coach was it? Was it Woody? Was it Mike Woodson who, while Woody was in Atlanta and Kidd was with the Mavericks, saw him
dribbled into Woody.
Dribbled right into him because he knows that he was on the court.
That was bad. That in fact, he is in the right and then in the wrong for the exact same reason, which is get your ass off the floor. The coaches shouldn't be on the floor.
Yeah, no doubt.
I'm sorry. Okay, so Kidd, so you go to him, and he knows you're coming to talk to him.
Yeah.
What's your question that you're most nervous to ask? Like all of these things you have to approach in a different way, right? Depending on who the subject is. But like, what did you have a question you were gonna like? I'm saving this for the end, or I need to get him to talk about this, or this is a failure.
Well, so I'll back up even before that, which is that since I don't know him that well, and since I've always perceived him to be kind of, like I say, there's an iciness to him in his public persona, especially with the media. When you see him, whether it's on the sideline, whether it's in press conferences, whether it's in the locker room when he was a player, you kind of feel like there's the gears are turning back there and you're not sure where he's really going or what he's thinking. You don't feel like you're always really connecting. I'm saying this as somebody who did not cover him day to day. The old Knicks and Nets beat writers who have been in New York forever and counted him on a daily basis, I think had a little bit different connection. So for me, part of any nervousness is the wrong word, but apprehension was I don't really know him and I don't know how this is going to go, and I am going to ask some sensitive things, and I'm not.
And he's going to know that you're going to talk to people with the Bucks and the Nets who are going to say he lost the locker room.
Yeah.
The young players got tired of hearing how it was all their fault.
Yeah.
He was unpredictable. All this stuff is in your story. The stuff about him falling in and out of love with players is 100% correct. And trade me this guy. Oh, I hate this guy.
Yep.
Get me Mirza Teletovic, but Jason, Mirza doesn't play any defense. You're going to be mad about that. No, he's going to play defense. Oh, Mirza doesn't play any defense. I hate him now. Like, that's all true.
Yep. And I didn't even get into every single one of those. I could have gone chapter and verse on like a long list of those guys in both cities, but primarily Milwaukee because he was there longer. I just didn't want to get too much lost in the weeds because there were just there's so many tangents I could have gone down. This could have been like a 15,000 word story, and you just can't do that. So here's what we did. We arranged to have breakfast. So we met up at a nice restaurant about 10 minutes from his house. We just had breakfast, and we just shot the shit for a while. It was just kind of more of a get to know you. We just, we're both Bay Area guys, right? He grew up in Oakland area and grew up in San Jose. So we talked Northern California. We talked just the NBA at large, talked about the Shaq and Kobe years that I covered. Like it was just kind of like a fun basketball discussion and a conversation that as we're having it in the back of my mind, I'm going, my gosh, I never viewed this guy as being this personable from a distance before. And by the time the day is over, I'm thinking, man, if he would just drop the steely facade now and then and be this engaging on a day-to-day basis. Look, not that your engagement with the media is the be-all, end-all, but it does give the public then, by connection, a different view of you. And I always think, whether this is about players, coaches, whoever, like occasionally let people in, be a little bit more self-effacing, smile more. We joked about that, or he joked about this, about not, did I not smile enough as coach? Yeah, you probably didn't. But anyway, as I'm sitting there finding this guy to be so personable, who at a distance I'd always found to be so closed off, kind of aloof, and like I say, a little icy, that was interesting. So we talked over breakfast with no recorder on, my notebook's off to the side. I'm not taking any notes. We're just having a great conversation. Then we went back to his house, sat in the backyard, and, met his wife and kids. He took me on a tour of the garage has all of the jerseys, all of his commemorative jerseys up. There's a bunch of commemorative basketballs in an alcove in this one room. And again, very human version of Jason Kidd that you don't often get to see, because he's talking about, the stuff that meant the most to him. And he's showing me the Muhammad Ali glove and the Reggie Jackson signed bat that I think the Knicks presented him when he visited the Knicks in like 2009 as a free agent, but turned them down. And when I said, oh yeah, you I think it was the same summer as Grant Hill. I'm like, yeah, you and Grant Hill really just led them on that summer or whatever. And he just kind of like chuckled, like he was like, we were exploring. So anyway, that's how it went. It went from very like a social version of this meeting to then the interview. And so by the time we get to the interview, I think there was a comfort between us that made it easier for me to ask some of those questions. And I did start with, you asked, so where do you begin with this? Obviously, yeah, you don't go in swinging with, hey, the Bucks tuned you out and a lot of, players hated you by the end. It was more of the premise you threw out before. Jason, you haven't been out of basketball in your entire adult life. You went straight from your Knicks jersey to coaching the Nets. What's it been like just do nothing for 2 months? And that's when we got into just, obviously he's getting to be with his family, take his kids to school, go to baseball practice, all this unpacking because they just moved into this house on March 1st in the Paradise Valley area outside Phoenix. And so it was just interesting to hear him put that stuff in perspective. Whatever anybody may think of Jason Kidd, whatever you may think, whatever I may think, fans may think, there's always this human element to the game and to coaching and the amount of time it takes them away from their families. How much playing takes away from your families too. So it was kind of just like humanizing, endearing to hear him discuss getting to have that time with them and to be somewhat reflective. There was a weird, we'll talk about it, but there's a weird mix there of him being partially reflective on what's gone right and wrong so far in his coaching career, and partially just saying like, no, man, I was right on any number of things.
Which is a very human tug of war to have within yourself, particularly for a strong-willed, ultra-successful person like Jason Kidd. Did he get into his relationship with Jabari Parker at all?
That we did not get into, no. Because I was trying to be a little bit overview here and it be more about what's going on in his own mind, I called a bunch of people associated with the Bucks. I called a bunch of people associated with the Nets from his year there. And so I just, I had a ton of different ways I could have gone and a ton of different things I could have presented. But also, you don't want this to turn into a trial either.
That was, so when he got fired about 3 weeks later, 2 weeks later, I wrote about the Bucks. And I wrote, just let's zoom out and think about the Bucks. And it was a very challenging piece to write because there is a temptation to relitigate the Jason Kidd era, which is fair. And there are lots of issues I talked about in that piece. His defense he's a strange dude, man. And he does some, I shouldn't say that. I don't think he's a strange dude. He's an interesting personality and he does some stuff that other coaches would not do. Like I had this anecdote in the story about him stopping a film session 2 seasons ago maybe to go around to every player one by one in front of the group and ask them, who do you think is the best player on the team? And his point was to establish like a hierarchy of, make every player sort of confront realities. Like, I don't think he might be the only coach who would do that.
Yeah, I could almost see. I was going to say Phil Jackson, but I don't think Phil would. Well, he might. Phil loves the mind games, and Phil loves like putting guys on the spot. I could see him maybe doing that. That's a little bit too much playing to guys' egos or against their egos, as the case may be. But I do think that there's a lot about him that's kind of unorthodox as a personality and as a coach. And
perfect word.
He thinks differently, and I think he does like making guys uncomfortable because in the same way that Phil is my reference point. Phil would make you uncomfortable because he thought that there was something to get out of that. There was an end game to it. I'm not doing this just to demean you. I'm doing this because I think by you having to confront these things, you're going to be a better player. You're going to be more conscious of what you're doing or not doing. And look, you and I both know NBA teams do have a hierarchy, and sometimes it's not clear, and that lack of clarity undermines it. So, whatever he was doing in that moment, like I wouldn't rule it out. Like I don't mean I wouldn't rule out that it happened. I wouldn't rule out the effectiveness of it.
No, nor would I. But there were some things that did not work out by the end. Number one of which was the way they played defense with the crazy trapping and blitzing and all of that. But I even thought that was interesting. That was an attempt to, I think, create a perfect defense, which is not possible, particularly with the way teams shoot threes now. But what's interesting is after about 2 weeks where it looked like Prunty, the new coach, was going to really soften that defense up and change it, the Bucks are the Bucks still. Like, their defense since – I have too many tabs open, but their defense since the All-Star break is about 20th. Oh, that's offense. Their defense is no, I was right, about 20th or 21st. Their offense is about average. They still allow the same shots that they allowed under Kidd, a lot of shots at the rim, a lot of corner threes, and everyone's complaining that their offense is aimless. And it's like, okay, it's the same team. Like nothing changed. And that's why they are, I mean, you know this, every unemployed and even employed, no, I shouldn't have, every coach that wants a new job, either because they don't have one or they're a little discontented with the one they have, is going to try to get that job. That is the job of the summer in the NBA, assuming it opens, which, apologies to Joe Prunty, it's going to.
Yeah, no, I think that's a near certainty. And there could be a good 8 to 10 jobs open this summer, potentially. I mean, it could just be a bloodbath.
Including the one in the city where Jason Kidd is now living.
Yes.
Have you heard any Jason Kidd to Suns buzz? He is a Suns alum.
Yeah. Yes, I have heard buzz. And in fact, when I asked a few people as I was, talking to them about Jason in general, and I said, where could you see him end up? And two people in two very different walks of NBA life both said Phoenix immediately. And that was before, I don't know if either of those people even knew that he was living out there. Maybe they did. And again, look, Jason's played in Phoenix before. He spent a good chunk of his career there. That they settled there does not necessarily mean
sure
that that's where he's ending up and that it's a fait accompli. I don't know that. It would make a lot of sense in a lot of ways. I think one of the most interesting things about Jason Kidd's next move as coach is what kind of team is he best suited to? Because you can make the case based just on his own makeup and a lot of the things that he said, even in our interview, that he's better off with a veteran team, that a team that speaks the language, as he says, so he doesn't have to explain it all. When he says something, they already know what he's getting at, and he doesn't have to go out and demonstrate. Now, he says he loves the teaching part, too, and he loves these little aha moments where he has been saying, no, do it this way, do it this way, do it this way, and then they do it, and they smile, and they go, oh, now I get it. You're right, because I just saw this unfold in this game. So he likes those moments where the light bulb turns on with the young players, but he has an incredible impatience. And one of the things he talked about when I asked him, listen, what have you learned so far? What do you know now that you didn't know 4 years ago when you took off your jersey and put on a suit? And he said patience. That was the very first thing that came out of his mouth, patience. That now, he can acknowledge that and be self-aware enough to say it. It also doesn't mean that he's going to actually be more patient the next time, because I think some of these things you just can't help in yourself. That's part of his personality. And the fact is, there's a reason we don't see a lot of future Hall of Fame type players, and he's going to be announced probably soon, there's not a lot of Hall of Fame players who then become great coaches, and especially in today's game. And I think a lot of that is that whole thing where like you can't. Kobe would never have the patience to deal with guys who just don't see the game or understand the game the way he does or work as hard as he does. And that's kind of the impression I get with Kidd too, especially with younger players. Now with the Nets, he had, granted, an aging, near the twilight KG and Paul Pierce, but he had those guys, and they understood him at least. And he had, for what it was worth, Joe Johnson, Darren Williams, Brook Lopez, guys who had made All-Star teams.
A revelation in your story. So you made a decision in doing the story that it was probably because you could get you just ended up getting interesting information. Why don't I try and get more of going back to the Nets?
Yeah.
And one of the revelations that comes out is that he wanted to bench Darren Williams then and there to start Sean Livingston.
Yeah.
And he cops to it on the record.
Yeah.
Which means that, like many people in the NBA, he doesn't give a f*** if Darren Williams knows he wanted to bench him.
He gave no fucks at that point. And the interesting thing was that when he first got there was a thought that, because Darren Williams is like, you talk about your tough NBA personalities, Darren Williams is a kind of a pain in the ass during most of his career, and especially during his Brooklyn time. Moody guy.
Not a popular member of the Brooklyn Nets.
No. Moody, can be hard to reach, can turn on a dime on you. By the way, a lot of people think Jason Kidd also can turn on a dime on you. So they thought that Jason and Darren, who had a relationship, outside of them having worked together, that Kidd was going to be the one to reach Darren, and that did not end up being the case. And Kidd lost faith in him very quickly. And not only did he want to start Sean Livingston, but didn't. But as I write, the team sensed, and this was according to people I talked to in Brooklyn, the team saw that he had lost faith in Darren, and so the team lost faith in him as well. And listen, we've seen some of this stuff. Paul Pierce has been on the record all over the place. Jackie McMullen, I think, was the first to get Paul on the record.
Paul will not hold back when he talks about D. Will.
Yeah, just burying him. So it's always interesting, as we get further and further from a particular season or era, that you get to learn more than we knew in the moment. Things you suspected, things that seemed like they were the case, and now we're seeing it. That in fact, a lot of their problems led back to Darren Williams and that relationship. And yes, so somebody else outside of this had told me, or there's somebody along the way, my reporting before I went to go talk to Jason, had said he wanted to bench Darren Williams in favor of Sean Livingston. So look, I had to pick and choose. Like, I can't go chapter and verse on every single thing from the Nets and Bucks.
Spend 6 months.
So I picked the ones that were most interesting, and I did. So I asked. I said, so I hear you wanted to bench Darren in favor of Sean. And he says, yeah, maybe I wanted to do that. And then as he starts to talk, it's clear he absolutely wanted to do that. Like, the way he said it was very coy. Like, he was absolutely acknowledging it. And by the way, that was Sean Livingston's, kind of his bounce-back season. Like, that was the pivot point between injured, bouncing around the league Sean Livingston and stalwart of Warriors rotation Sean Livingston. And the Nets really would have loved to have kept him, but they couldn't because of payroll issues at that time.
The Nets did have some payroll issues.
Just a few.
There were some payroll issues back then. Hey, guys, if you're anything like me and you were career-oriented and really hustling in your 20s and 30s, you don't take care of the fundamental things about yourself. You don't see the doctor, you don't see the dentist enough, you don't take care of your body enough, and medical problems can start sort of adding up before you know it. 4hims.com is a site that is trying to help you before those problems exist. Step 1, 66% of men start losing their hair by age 35, and by the time you start losing it, it's too late. All of those times you didn't go to the doctor or pay attention or really even care, they have all come back to haunt you. Before you turn to weird solutions that continue to do nothing, you can turn to medicine and science through 4hims.com. It's a one-stop shop for hair loss. That's where they're starting. But skincare, sexual wellness, all these things that we're sort of afraid to talk about, and 4hims will solve all that. It connects you to real doctors who will provide medical-grade solutions to treat hair loss. Again, that's where they're starting, with well-known generic equivalents to name-brand prescription drugs to help you save money, keep your hair, all of that stuff. It's not snake oil. It's prescriptions that are backed by real science. You don't have to sit in the doctor's office. You don't have to sit in a waiting room. It connects you to doctors all through the website, and you just answer a few quick questions, and a doctor will review and prescribe things for you. So my listeners get a trial month on 4hims for just $5 right now while supplies last. You have to see the website for full details. Here's what you do. Go to 4hims.com/lowpost. The name of this podcast, all one word, 4hims.com/lowpost. I'll spell it out, FORHIMS.com/lowpost. And you can start looking around and maybe getting that $5 trial month. It is interesting because it you have in your story, and look, the maniacal anti-kid fiefdom of Buck's Twitter is not going to want to hear this, but you do have in your story that even critics of his with the Bucks and the Nets, even people who by the end were like, enough, I don't want this guy to be our coach anymore, will tell you he could be a good coach.
Yeah.
Like, he thinks the game in interesting ways, and, you know, he could develop into a good coach if he's not one already. He might be one already, but he could be a good coach. His undoing, I think, was again, you put it very well where you said, you know, it's one thing to talk about this with reflection now in Phoenix by the pool and the jersey memorabilia outside of the rat race, to live it day to day when you've lost 3 straight and you're just one of these. Like, there are a lot of coaches like this, not just Jason. Like, you lose 3 straight. This was Larry Brown. Lose 3 straight, I want to trade the whole team.
Oh, Stan Van Gundy.
Yeah. Want to trade the whole team.
Yeah. Larry Brown.
Yeah. I think that war on players feel that, and that war on players. I mean, you talk about somebody like Greg Monroe, who when Jason was fired, they played Phoenix, I think maybe that game.
That night, yes.
And they asked Greg Monroe to comment, and he just looked at the reporters like, I'm not going to like, and because Jason Kidd fell out of love with Greg Monroe, and Greg Monroe for a period of time fell out of the rotation, which baffled everybody with the Bucks, because he was the crown jewel of their free agency history, was Greg Monroe. And the commitment to that blitzing style of defense, when he had people in his own organization saying it's not working, let's try something different. And again, I didn't mind trying it. I think it worked for a while and then it stopped working. And as I wrote over and over, you can play an aggressive defense. You can just play it like 80% of the level of aggression you're playing at now, and it's still aggressive and it still fulfills what you want to do. But I look at someone like Mike D'Antoni, and some of these old school NBA guys, and Jason Kidd is old school, they have an aversion to switching. Switching is a sign of weakness. Yeah. Switching is what you do when you can't guard your guy. Mike D'Antoni is now switching everything because that's the personnel he has. That's what works against a lot of modern NBA pick and roll teams. Just, all right, you guys want to switch everything? Switch everything. I don't care. I don't care if I don't believe that. And the Bucks have a roster that is just tailor-made to switch lots and lots of stuff. They're tailor-made to try to play Giannis or Jabari, pick whoever, as center. Mm-hmm. They never do, still.
Yeah.
And these are the things that the next coach who goes there is going to have to look at and say, how do we want to play offense? How do we want to play defense? What are our fundamental beliefs about basketball? And by the end, Milwaukee's ownership wanted someone who had different fundamental beliefs than Jason Kidd, for better or worse.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see who they decide to hire and whether or not their owners can agree with each other on who they want to hire. And is that going to be somebody who's a little more old school or somebody who's a little bit more innovative? Is it a top assistant somewhere? Is it somebody off the recently fired list, like, you know, probably not like David Fizdale, right? Like, Fizdale is going to be too close to like the Kidd model in terms of feeling old school. Although I think here's one of the things, and I couldn't find the right exact way to say this in the story, but one of the things that became clear to me about Jason Kidd and his personality and rubbing guys the wrong way, and sometimes rubbing people outside of the locker room the wrong way within the organization. We talk about, you know, old school or hard ass or whatever the label is. You know, Greg Popovich has this amazing gift for seeming like the most old school, maniacal hard ass you've ever seen, but then he puts his arm around the guy's shoulder, smiles, laughs, whatever, slaps him on the butt, and he can gauge the situation, and he can do both. He can pivot between both, and so players, when he's on them, they know it's coming from the right place, and a place of love and care and wanting them to be the best they can be. If you can't do both sides of that, if you've only got the one side, that's when you lose guys. And I think that's, like, to me, that's Jason Kidd right now, is that he was able to, you know, the reason he was able to get the Bucks, what was it, a 26-win improvement or whatever in year one, a lot of different factors that go into it. It's not just coaching. But apart, like, young team, impressionable, looked up to future Hall of Fame point guard Jason Kidd. He could come in there and just, you know, get on guys, get into them, curse them out, do whatever, and they're like, yep, they've proven nothing. A couple of years in, they've at least proven they belong. They made a playoffs in his first season, surprisingly, as a 6th seed. And now that approach doesn't necessarily work as well anymore. And we've seen this play many times before with other coaches. Scott Skiles had that rep. couple years in, guys start to just wear down.
Well, and the test case now is going to be Mike Malone in Denver because he has the same sort of reputation, and they're on the outside looking in by a couple of games, and had high expectations.
Yeah, so Kidd is not unique in this regard, but I think that's going to be the interesting thing. So for the Bucks, are you going with somebody who's a little bit more of a quote unquote players coach, or somebody who's a little bit more a Brad Stevens like type who puts himself personality-wise as no bigger than any of his players, right? Kidd was certainly like, especially when he got there, like, okay, it's now about me for the time being. I'm the dominant figure here, and it's now obviously Giannis. I don't know. Like,
I was going to say, there's someone else who should have a say in who the coach is, or at least some sort of voice in the process.
For
and that's
sure,
Giannis. For
sure. So that will be interesting, and where Jason Kidd lands will be interesting. I do think someone's going to hire him again. I do think that he's still got a future in this league, but people are going to have to gauge, a lot of what we've just been talking about to decide whether or not he makes sense. But the basketball acumen is indisputable.
I would now. I'll say this, and I've put some thought into how many openings there are going to be this summer. There may, but not too much thought into the possibility that maybe there will be 2 or 3 more than I would predict. I would predict that there will be more of a cooling off period before somebody hires Jason Kidd. I think it will be 2019-2020 season. I don't think I would bet against him being a head coach of an NBA team next season. But, that could be totally invalid if a certain regime change happens and that new GM is close with Jason, or a couple other coaches get fired that we don't expect. So who knows? I will say he makes a good point in your piece about NBA progress being nonlinear. In other words, they come in and they win 40 whatever games, and then they go 33 and 49 the next year, and it wasn't hard to see them backsliding that year. No. And the Pistons have just lived this, right? Like, just because you are on an upswing from year A to year B doesn't mean that it's going to continue from year B to year C and year C to year. The NBA doesn't work like that.
No.
Even if you have a top 10 player, the NBA doesn't work like that. Not always, anyway. It's a great story. Everything Howard writes is great, but it just a peek inside Jason Kidd's life and the Nets stuff, which I don't want to spoil. I was most pleasantly surprised by the Nets stuff. There's Lawrence Frank stuff. There's a lot of good Nets, like digging back into Lawrence Frank writing the daily reports, which was another great NBA subplot, the daily reports.
Yeah, I think I probably could have done another 1,000 words just on relitigating, revisiting a lot of the Nets time, which, by the way, like, it was only one season. A lot of stuff happened in one season with that Nets team.
It's just the Nets.
But
now the Nets are a nice, placid, bad team. Just a nice, growing, got some interesting pieces, but it's like a lot calm.
Yeah.
Maybe not a lot of fans in the stands, but a lot calm.
No, not a lot of fans in the stands, but it's they'll get there.
Buying tickets to sporting events or comedy shows or plays or whatever you want to attend, there was a time when that became a super complicated ordeal. You'd have to go to 20 different websites on the secondary market to make sure you got every deal in front of you. You weren't making a bad decision. Not every purchase was fully guaranteed. SeatGeek has changed all of that. Is the smartest and easiest way to get tickets to every type of event you want, even the hottest ticket on Broadway, Hamilton, which they helped me get tickets to. It saves you time, it saves you money. All of those sites that you had to visit separately, it collates them into one place. It compares and contrasts deals in a very easy, user-friendly way. It has a color-coded system, so you know if you're getting an undermarket deal, a good deal, a bad deal, an obscured seat, whatever. It's all easily there to identify, and you make your decision very fast. Every purchase is fully guaranteed, so you can shop for tickets on SeatGeek with confidence. And best of all, my listeners get $20 off their first SeatGeek purchase. As always, that's a pretty good discount. That could be, a half or a third of a ticket to a pretty good event. All you have to do is download the SeatGeek app and enter promo code LOWE, L-O-W-E. That's my last name, Lowe, the name of this podcast. Promo code LOWE, $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase.
Hey everyone, as we get into an awards discussion here, just want to remind you that Howard and I recorded this late on Wednesday due to my travel schedule before Joel Embiid, whose name is about to come up a bunch, suffered a facial contusion. So just to be clear, it's the omission of that is not due to anything but my weird travel schedule and our resulting recording schedule. And get well, Joel Embiid.
Let's switch gears and do a little bit of awards and playoff stuff. LeBron came out and said if he had to vote for MVP, he would vote for himself, which is, I think, maybe the loudest he's ever proclaimed his own candidacy for MVP. He's been open about wanting to win another one.
Yeah.
But he is injecting himself around game 75 and saying, I am the MVP of the league. Essentially. He didn't just say that. He didn't put it that way, but that's what he's saying. You should vote for me. I think this is fascinating because this has been James Harden's award all year.
Yeah.
I still think he's going to win. LeBron has just put up absolutely mind-boggling numbers since the trade deadline and even a little bit before. And his numbers for the season, I mean, I don't need to go chapter and verse. 27, 9 and 9, 55% shooting. Arguably the best offensive year of his career. I would disagree with that assessment, but the fact that you can make the argument, if you're going to sit here and tell me LeBron James is having the best offensive season of his career for a team that is a complete mess beyond him because of injuries and trades and whatever. Even the coach is gone right now.
Yeah.
Get well, Ty Lue. If you're going to tell me that he's having his best offensive year ever, putting up those numbers, I'm not sure his MVP candidacy is as easy to dismiss as a lot of people felt that it was a week ago, 2 weeks ago. The numbers are what they are. And I'll say this, your temptation, if you're going to dismiss him, is to say he's been bad defensively this year. Didn't try, coasted, blah, blah. Two things. James Harden is not good defensively still, okay? James Harden has been better defensively this year because the Rockets hide him all the time, move him around the floor like a chess piece on the worst player or the least threatening player, which is fine. The Cavs do the same thing. That's fine. You know what? James Harden is versatile enough and big enough and strong enough and tough enough to be hidden on power forwards, which is very helpful for their team for lots of different reasons. Credit to him for that. But James Harden has not transformed himself into a good defensive player. The context around him has changed so that he's a less damaging defensive player. Posit all that. The argument for James Harden over LeBron James is really just 17 more wins. That's it. And I thought, before spending a couple more hours thinking about this morning and looking at numbers and talking to people, I thought the argument was more than that. And maybe that's a lot, and maybe it's not. I'll even say this. I talked to a couple, 3 or 4 actually, analytics guys who work for teams because they have the tracking data in front of them. They have their own private, warehouse of tracking data. And I said, tell me where LeBron ranks defensively, this season, because the eye test says this and blah, blah. You know what? All of them. He's still good. And I shot back like, I just can't get there because I watched those games before the trade deadline where he just almost committed mutiny on the floor. It's still good. Still good. And there's lots of complicated stuff
Especially
happening.
in January.
So and that's interesting to think about, right? Like, how could he still be good? How could he still be a top 30 NBA defensive player? Well, first of all, he's LeBron. So when you're guarded by LeBron, 90% of the league is like, holy shit, LeBron's guarding me, I better pass.
Yep.
When you see LeBron looming on the weak side, he wasn't looming anywhere for the month of January, but he's just over there somewhere, you might get a little freaked out. And he's still big and fast. So like maybe we've all exaggerated those numbers. What I didn't see the specific numbers, but maybe we've all just sort of, because of what the expectations are for him and how bad the eye test can look when it's bad, maybe we've all tricked ourselves into thinking like, oh yeah, he was just a bad defensive player this year. Well, that's not true.
There's this. We started talking a few years about gravity. Players that you couldn't leave because they're great shooters, right? And so there's this gravity. They pull you toward them. I mean, it's like he has like, I don't know if it's reverse gravity or some other form of it, but like the mere presence of LeBron, I think, is what you're saying. Like maybe he's not putting in the same effort that we saw in prior seasons.
No, maybe he's not.
So, but the effect is still there. Just by his existence. The fact that he is between those lines has an impact that is not measurable necessarily by whether or not he's breaking a sweat defensively, right? Because to your point, there are drives that aren't happening or times that the guys aren't going to challenge him. There's a looming threat.
And again, part of the reason they won't challenge him is because he's guarding the worst offensive player on the other team.
Okay, so here's a fun way to look at this, though, Zach. Because we're measuring, first of all, a couple things. We're measuring LeBron based on LeBron. Shaq suffered from this back in his day. Shaq wins an MVP, never wins another one after that. Why? He was still as dominant as ever in a lot of ways. He just wasn't as dominant as he had been his MVP year. Shaq got measured against Shaq, and that became an impossible standard. Also, Shaq tended to slack off now and then. LeBron is being measured against the impossible standard of LeBron. But also this. It's fine that we're folding defense into this argument, but...
Yes, of course it is.
But we have a double standard here. One, we're not applying it to James Harden. We're just saying he's MVP.
I just did.
But you brought it up as a talking point. But when we all fill out our ballots in a couple of weeks, we're not going to go, Harden, he still is kind of lame defensively. Maybe that's not what the MVP should be. We're just going to give it to him because he has the stats and the win total. It's almost always about stats and win total, with the exception of last year when everybody decided to lose their minds and vote for Russell Westbrook.
Wow, Howard Beck. Howard Beck not welcome in Oklahoma City.
Park that to the side for a
second. You
second.
have been declined your interview request for Josh Eustace.
Park that to the side for a second. But here's the recent history of the MVP award. Steph Curry wins it back-to-back. We weren't considering defense with Steph Curry. Derrick Rose...
Disagree.
Who was considering his defense in deciding to give it to Steph Curry?
Here's what I was considering. Steph
Curry... But
you're
different than everybody else.
Steph Curry was not regularly falling into meme-worthy comas on the floor.
Meme-worthy
comas. That mattered. Okay? And he was a better offensive player in those years than James Harden.
There's your rock band name, the meme-worthy comas.
I could do better.
That's pretty good. Dirk Nowitzki in 2006-07 was not MVP based on anything to do with his defense. Steve Nash in his back-to-back years.
Do not besmirch Dirk Nowitzki on this podcast.
I'm not besmirching anybody. I'm just saying.
Besmirched. What's besmirch in German? Is it already German? You just besmirched.
It's got a lot of consonants in a row at the end, so it may be German. Steve Nash in his back-to-back years, nobody gave a crap whether or not he was a good defender or tried or not. We're superimposing Allen Iverson, 2000, 2001. There are plenty of guys who have won MVP where defense was not the least bit of a consideration, I think, on the part of the voters. And I'm not saying that excuses it or that we shouldn't apply it, but we're not applying it. We didn't apply it to Westbrook last year. We're not applying it, except for you, to Harden this year. So if LeBron has slipped there, and all the analytics guys are telling you, Zach, that he's still actually really good, and his numbers are off the charts, it leads me to my other point, which is this. Did we destroy the mold? Because for the longest time, for 30-something years, and I don't have the exact stats from you. Remember, 30-something years, 35 years, whatever it was, every MVP was from either a team that won 50 games or prorated to 50 in a lockout season and was top 2 or 3 in their conference and could readily be identified as a contender. And Russell Westbrook was on a team that finished 6th in the conference and won only 47 games. And by any historical standards, I think fell short. That's why I voted for James Harden. That's why you voted for Kawhi Leonard, or at least there's part of that, right? If we've thrown that out the window, either this was a one-time exception for Russ because triple doubles,
which by the way, he might average a triple-double again
and won't be on ballots.
Has no chance to win the MVP.
All right, so,
which shows you how crazy it was that people voted for him for that reason last year.
My logical challenge then to the MVP voters who voted for Westbrook last year, and I respect you all, if you voted for Russell Westbrook last year based on averaging a triple-double and you're not going to put him on your ballot this year or he's going to be 5th or something, you need to ask yourself why. Because, by the way, something that's been lost amid this season, the Thunder, who won only 47 games last year, which ordinarily would have disqualified somebody from MVP, was supposedly about this weak supporting cast. He got Paul George, got Carmelo. I know, diminished Carmelo. He's basically
boy, has Carmelo been bad.
But Russell Westbrook's team is basically on pace to win 1 or 2 more games than they won last season. So was it really about the supporting cast? All right, that's a whole
the answer
tangent.
Answer that we will get is that he's averaging 25 points a game after leading the league in scoring at 32 last year.
Yeah,
because it cannot be that he's averaging 9.7 rebounds instead of 10. Because if that's your reason for anything, that's a bad reason.
No, that would be a terrible reason. So Russell Westbrook is averaging a virtual triple-double, and a year ago that was enough to be the overwhelming MVP, and this year, because I think people are going to be inconsistent with this. I think they are going to downgrade him, and the people who voted for him last year and not this year, I think it's worth questioning what changed or why you're doing it that way. So
we should really be rooting for him to get to 10 rebounds.
Just to see what people would do. But so all that said, the reason I raise that as an issue is because if if the precedent was important, and it was to me, clearly, I stated this many times, the precedent to me mattered, that you're on a 50-plus win team, that you're on a readily identifiable contender of some sort within your conference, first, second, or third in your conference, which was why I couldn't vote for Westbrook last year. If that does not apply anymore, if Westbrook broke the mold entirely, then LeBron's stats are better than James Harden's stats. And LeBron's defense is better than James Harden's defense, even on LeBron's worst day.
I'm not sure they're better than James Harden's stats. We'd have to do a diagnostic across the board, VORP and warp and whip and shtip and PER, because Harden has him in a lot of those, in some of those shooting percentages, Bron, but that's maybe not
the basic totals, the counting numbers, the averages, Harden around 30 points, a little under 9 assists and 5.5 rebounds. LeBron at a few points less at 27. Few points fewer, I should say. Assists a little bit above at 9, and certainly above in rebounds by a few. And we would say that LeBron on his worst day is still a better defender. They're shooting. Obviously, LeBron's field goal percentage is way harder.
LeBron's true shooting is 62, and I'll look up Harden's true shooting now is 62.
All right. And for people who prefer effective field goal percentage, LeBron is at 594 and Harden's at 540. So let's forget that I said it would clearly be him. I do think his numbers are very, very strong. So it's going to tilt to Harden based on the Rockets' record, which goes to the old model, the precedent that I've always said was important, that I always say it's about individual excellence and team success. Last year, everybody decided to throw out the team success part because, triple doubles. So if that model is gone, if the precedent is insignificant, then you could vote for Anthony Davis. You could vote for LeBron. You could vote for Giannis. I mean, it could go any number of ways if the standings and the record don't matter anymore.
So you've hit on something that I struggle with, which is there is a large part of me that thinks the obsession with wins is dumb. And that Giannis doing what he's doing for a team that's 39 and 35 and 8th should receive serious consideration for MVP. Like I really on some fundamental believe that, or at least a 2 spot in the MVP. I think he's closer to MVP than he is to not in the discussion because of his team's record. Let's put it that way. I think he should
Well, to me, that's why it goes 5 deep. The ballot goes 5 deep. The closer you get to the top, the more the team success matters.
So I think he's closer to 1 than 5. How about that?
Sure. Okay.
Because his team without him has been a disaster, and I don't know how we can discredit him for that. And when he's on the floor, they're great. He's a candidate for Defensive Player of the Year. He is averaging whatever points and rebounds, and you do the thing. However, there is where the wins do matter is when you start to be on a team that's winning 55, 60, 65, whatever the Rockets are going to end up winning. They're at 61 already. There does come some unquantifiable expectation and pressure and spotlight of a team going into Houston for a Thursday TNT game or a Saturday ABC game is just going to be more amped up to play you, and your expectations for your performance are going to be more amped up than a team going into Milwaukee on a Wednesday. It's just different. The environment is different. The expectations are different. The pressure is different. And so the wins sort of factor into that a little bit. But I really do believe, I think Anthony Davis is a legitimate MVP. As legitimate as LeBron and James Harden, Anthony Davis, whose team is on the verge of passing Cleveland in the standings, or about equal, more or less equal. Like if they're a 43-win team, the Cavs are a 44-win team.
In the neighborhood.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
And for a team that lost DeMarcus Cousins and has a supporting cast that people before the season would have generously described as ragtag, to me, if the good side of Russell Westbrook's precedent is that I think it's okay for a player on a 47-win team to win the MVP.
Yeah. Fair in the sense that, MVP, part of the discussion has always been about just the individual excellence, right? The stats, the production, the leadership, the sheer mind-blowing performance of a guy over the course of an 82-game season, right? But I don't know. Maybe I'm being too beholden to history and precedent and putting too much weight on that. I think it's meaningful. The reason we understand what the MVP is, and granted, people think, oh, Steve Nash shouldn't have gotten his second one, and there's a year where this guy got it, should have been this. Like Simmons would recite them all off the top of his head. The reason we kind of have a general, universal understanding of what the MVP means is because we have had something that's been replicated over time, over 35 years or whatever it was, where you knew, hey, look. It's usually a guy on a 50-something win team, 50, 60 win team, and his team is one of the best in the league. And while that punishes your Anthony Davis types or a Giannis who are individually phenomenal, no fault of their own that their team is hovering around 500 or a couple of games above it. But that's not what MVP is. MVP is the guy who's won from one of the best teams. And yes, maybe that's punishing you for not having great teammates, but we also don't want to do the reverse, which has happened, by the way, where it's like, it can't be Steph Curry or Kevin Durant because they're both there and we can't parse it out. So neither one of them does. No, they're still awesome. And if they weren't both missing so many games this year, we'd have a really hard time, or at least I would, because I think both those guys had the stats to justify their discussion. But if you start punishing guys for having talent with them and elevating other guys for not having talent with them, it gets complicated. So to me, the objective standard becomes, let's always make sure that the team success is part of MVP. It's historically there. It gives us a understanding collectively that that's what an MVP is. And it's different in baseball. Baseball will have a guy on a team that was nowhere near the playoffs win MVP because it's all about individual production. And granted, baseball is more of an individual sport, yada, yada. But I don't know. I think that longstanding precedent that was deviated from last year is meaningful. And yes, that does mean it's hurting a guy like Anthony Davis through no fault of his own. But it's not just about your stats. It's never just been about your stats.
Hey, listeners, you probably think of electric toothbrushes as both super expensive and super bulky, like the one that Elaine Bennis had to carry on the subway and it ruined her day on Seinfeld. But Quip is the company that's going to change all of that. It's a brand new electric toothbrush that packs the right amount of vibrations into a slimmer design, and this is the best part, fraction of the cost of a traditional electric toothbrush. We'll get there in a second. This thing is so cool. It has guiding pulses that alert you when to switch sides on your mouth. It has a timer that ticks off at 2 minutes, which is like the minimum amount of time you're supposed to brush your teeth. In 2 minutes, if you don't count it, if you actually sit there and count it, that's a long time. So the timer is useful. It has a little suction thing that attaches to your mirror so you can travel with it and detach it easily. It's super cool. It's backed by a network of over 10,000 dental professionals. That's a lot of dental professionals. And it was named one of Time Magazine's best inventions of the year. That's pretty cool. And here it is. A Quip starts at $25. You probably would have guessed $100, $150, $25 if you go to getquip.com/Lowe, Lowe, my last name, and you get your first refill pack free with your purchase of that $25 Quip toothbrush. That's an incredible deal. Again, get your first refill pack free by going to getquip.com/Lowe, Lowe. That's getquip. I'll spell it out. GETQUIP.com/Lowe. I think, to me, the top four is set.
In order?
No. In some
okay.
order, it's
right.
LeBron, Harden, Giannis, and Anthony Davis. I put Giannis firmly in the top four.
It's funny because I've seen a couple of people on Twitter in recent days where when they're listing, here's my five as of now, Giannis is the guy who's not in there. It's been like Harden, LeBron, Anthony Davis, Dame, and like DeMar.
DeMar's out.
Or it's maybe
Lowry has been better than DeMar for the last.
I'm trying to remember who the other possible fifth was.
For me, if I would listen to an argument for anyone to be in the top four, and certainly these would be my leading guys for fifth, it's Lillard, LaMarcus Aldridge, Durant, and Westbrook. Those are the ones I would listen to.
Yeah.
I wouldn't listen to DeMar. I love DeMar. I wouldn't listen to DeMar.
Yeah, DeMar, this is where the historical standard that I've been referring to actually could give DeMar like a weird candidacy, right? Because they're going to finish with the best record in the East, obviously, potentially the second best record in the NBA. And so if team success matters, and also just in acknowledgement of DeMar having made these leaps in his own game and helping lead them there, then you can make the argument. That's not the argument for DeMar to be top of the ballot. It's just an argument for him to be, possibly fifth. But But I've seen people leave Giannis off, and probably, again, because of the precedent and because the Bucks, as an underachieving team, it hurts your candidacy. It was hurting LeBron's candidacy in January when he was just kind of coasting.
Do you care if Cleveland fails to hold the 3rd seed, which is a coveted spot right now because of how wounded Boston is? Does that matter to you if Philadelphia passes them? At least Philadelphia passes them?
Will it matter as I'm filling out my MVP ballot?
Yeah. If he can't say we're 3rd, we want to be 3rd, we're comfortable there, that's the route we want, and they can't hold it.
Yeah. I'm not sure how I'll deal with that. I mean, I'm not even sure who my number 2 is anyway right now. I mean, James Harden, I think, has been firmly in the top spot for weeks and weeks and weeks now. So that part has been easy. And LeBron is on the ballot, and Anthony Davis is on the ballot, and Dame is probably on the ballot. And I'm not sure beyond that, and I'm not sure about order. But all right, as long as we're going down that road, if Philly gets to 3, what do you do with Joel Embiid? Is he on the ballot? I think people
fair question.
I think people are hesitant to even say it because it's his first full season and he's young, and everybody's just too happy with the idea that, well, Embiid and Simmons have led the Sixers to this surprising, not just their first playoffs, but maybe even top 4. But again, back to my definition, individual excellence plus team success equals some sort of MVP candidacy. If the Sixers are top 4 with this young team that just broke through, and Embiid's got these monster numbers and is one of the best defensive bigs in the NBA by most assessments, maybe Embiid should be on the ballot.
Philly has a real chance to win out the whole season. Their schedule is garbage. They could get to 52 wins. Their game against Cleveland, which is Friday, April 6th, is going to be a massive, massive game because right now they're projected to pass Cleveland. Yeah. If they tie, it will be hard for them to win the tiebreaker, though possible. The Cleveland's division begins to factor into it, and then my brain starts to hurt, and 3-way ties could happen, and then my brain really starts to hurt. But Philly could win out. And if they win out, if they go 7-1 or 8-0 the rest of the way, it's going to be very hard for Cleveland to keep the 3rd seed. Really hard.
Yeah. Not only that, if you can see Philly getting to 3, and then they're facing a wounded Celtics team in the second round, assuming they get there.
If they advance.
If they advance. I mean, there's now a conceivable path of Philly to the conference finals, which would have sounded ludicrous a couple of months ago or even a few weeks ago, potentially. But there is a reasonable path. Now, listen, youth doesn't generally win in the NBA. Ask Jason Kidd. And the playoffs are a whole different monster, and these guys haven't seen it before. And it may well undermine them, and even if they're the 3rd seed, maybe they're losing to a 6th-seeded Washington or Miami or somebody. Maybe. But on talent and on bracket, if they got to the 3rd seed, it's not crazy that they could get to the conference finals. Not predicting it, I just think it's an interesting potential.
The other interesting thing I'm monitoring is, we're monitoring all this, but 6, 7, 8 in the East, and who gets 7th specifically is really interesting because all these teams would rather play the Celtics than the Raptors, obviously, and they're beginning to say, well, I'd rather play the Celtics than whether it's Cleveland or Philly, who's ever at 3. So planning out your first round or your second round. And where that's interesting right now is the Wizards are 6th, 2 games up on Miami and Milwaukee in the loss column. Miami's schedule is a complete joke the rest of the way. Very, very solid chance Miami finishes 6-1. Their schedule is Chicago, Brooklyn, Atlanta, Knicks, Thunder, Raptors in the season finale, which could be Skeleton Crew Raptors. If they finish 6-1, they could pass Washington and accidentally move into the 6th seed. Washington can move to 7. Milwaukee has a harder schedule and has lost the tiebreaker with Miami. I just think how that settles out, it's probably even too early to talk about it, but that's going to be like how hungry is Washington to keep the 6? Remember, they celebrated their division title last year. Remember that? They poured out. It was in LA. They poured out a little water in the locker room and everything.
Nope. Nobody should ever celebrate division titles or raise division banners. It's the saddest thing I've ever seen. Those should not even exist.
But the whole East from 3 to 8 is super interesting in terms of where everybody ends up and what Indiana has to say about it and all of that.
My thought has been for the last several weeks, and I'll just throw this out as my postseason hot take. I think we're getting at least pre-postseason.
Yeah,
we're not
pre-postseason. Yeah.
Pre-postseason, postseason hot take.
Okay.
I don't know how many P's were in there.
Yeah.
Let's come up with an acronym. I think we're getting a significant upset, maybe one in each conference. And I don't mean a 5 beating a 4 because that's not really an upset. I think the potential exists for at least one 6 beating a 3, a 7 beating a 2. I'm not saying there's going to be an 8 beating a 1. But because of the way how fluid things are, how much pseudo-parity there seems to be right now, and how unreliable some of these teams are. Like, if the Cavs finish third, I'm not saying the Cavs are getting upset in the first round, but they haven't been that good. So if they went down, we shouldn't be shocked, except because they're LeBron's team. If the Sixers are third and they go down...
I'll be shocked. If they lose in the first round,
right.
I'll be shocked.
I'll be shocked because it's LeBron, but
that's a big because.
But he stubs his toe, or I don't know.
LeBron, you could take a machete to LeBron's head, and he would get up and be like, "All right, I'm ready. Let's go."
The machete would come away.
Did I get fouled?
Did
I get the call? Okay.
If Philly is third, I mean, none of us are going to be surprised if they get upset as a team making its playoff debut after 5 years out, and Embiid and Simmons have never done it. In the West, we're already all talking about the Jazz being the team nobody wants to face in the first round. The Spurs, if Kawhi Leonard magically comes back and is still magically Kawhi Leonard. So I mean, these are the potential is there. The potential is there. We don't see it often in the NBA. The playoffs almost always go to form. A 5 beats a 4, whatever. But the 1, 2, 3 are almost always beating the 6, 7, 8. And this is a year where both conferences have the potential for some suspense.
Last thing, and then we're done. Have you thought about Defensive Player of the Year at all? Because I bring it up because the other guy who made a loud proclamation in the media was Rudy Gobert, to our own Tim McMahon, said, "I've been the most impactful player. I should win Defensive Player of the Year." He will end up, he's missed 26 games.
Yeah. Everybody says the people have asked about this, as I've polled people, as I'm sure you have the last several weeks, is that if we're not going to get caught up in games played, and now we get back to the whole Joel Embiid Rookie of the Year thing, although it was far fewer games.
That's an anomalous case.
Yeah, but still, it is a huge chunk that he's missed. But if you not counting that, or not considering that, he's the Defensive Player of the Year otherwise. And I haven't heard anybody make a compelling case otherwise. And it's hard because we had staples for the last few years that we knew were in there, right? Kawhi was always in there. Draymond was in there. Rudy Gobert's impact on the Jazz this season, I think, has been so profound that I don't know that the games missed should weigh in too much. Where are you on this?
It's harder for me. I can't easily default to Gobert. I think Anthony Davis has been unbelievable defensively. Embiid, I'm not sure Gobert's impact game to game is dramatically. I think he's a better defensive player than Embiid, but it's close. And statistically, they're both just off the charts, beast mode. And Giannis is a full every position destroyer. Is interesting. It's gonna be hard. That's that one. I'm gonna lose some sleep over that one.
Yeah, and the defensive, all defensive teams are difficult as well.
Always. And always you always forget how many damn awards there are and how much thought they all require, and by the end there's always like one, you're like, oh man, I gotta do second team all rookie. It's the Jazz are really coming out, and the Jazz have been unbelievable. I didn't think they would turn it around to this degree.
No.
And Quinn Snyder's legit Coach of the Year candidate. I mean, they've been one of the best stories of the season. However, my least favorite current subplot of NBA life is Utah and Boston fans continuing to argue over Gordon Hayward and this idea that the Jazz don't miss Gordon Hayward. The Jazz...
Give me a break.
If you went to everyone with the Jazz and said, hey, how do you like a scenario where you have Gordon Hayward and Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert for the next 5 years? Like, you think you're excited about that? How would you like if, like, all those, like, Royce O'Neal, Rodney Hood, now Jay Crowder, some of Joe Ingles, all those minutes started to get played by Gordon Hayward? Like,
yeah.
Think that'd be all right for you?
Yeah. It's a silly argument. Anybody who thinks they're better off without him is I mean, listen, if he were still there, would Donovan Mitchell have had as much oxygen to go and become the player that we've seen? I mean, maybe. Like, it's not like Gordon Hayward is some like ball-dominant, high-usage guy. I'm sure Donovan Mitchell would have evolved just fine. But it would be different. There's always a ripple effect.
Sure.
But it's a dumb argument. almost as annoying as the Mitchell versus Simmons stuff, where the second you say that one guy or the other is really good and maybe should be Rookie of the Year, the other camp just comes out and just like obliterates the guy, and it's annoying.
I'm not losing a lot of sleep over that one.
The answer to that one actually is just that I should just stay off of Twitter. That's the real.
I'm not losing a lot of sleep over Rookie of the Year. They're both been fantastic. But
it's a coin flip to me. But we'll see where it pans out in a couple weeks.
Well, in a week we're going to have much more playoff clarity. We'll look at the seeds and see where the seeds are, and it's going to be an interesting and long, as always, playoffs. But I'm sure we will be in the same city several times during those playoffs and reconvene. But everyone can go read Howard's stuff at Bleacher Report. His Jason Kidd story is illuminating and outstanding as always, and there will be more coming down the pike, I'm told, on non-Jason Kidd topics. So, Howard, it's always a pleasure to have you in, my friend.
Always a pleasure being here, Zach. Thank you.